Every civilization that's ever existed has had to solve the exact same problem. How do you get an idea out of one person's head and into someone else's? That's it. That's the entire challenge underneath everything humans have ever built. And yet the way we've solved this problem has changed so drastically over time that if you showed a Stone Age human a smartphone, they'd probably think it was magic, or a god, or something they needed to sacrifice a goat to. So today we're going through how humans have actually communicated throughout history, era by era, and figuring out what pushed each new system into existence, because honestly, some of these reasons are way dumber and way more human than you'd expect. Let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning, the Stone Age. Long before any kind of writing existed, humans were already communicating through speech and body language, likely for hundreds of thousands of years, tied directly to basic survival. You can't coordinate a hunt for a mammoth as a group if nobody can say, "go left." Beyond speech, one of the earliest confirmed forms of intentional communication is cave art. The Chauvet cave paintings in France, dated to around 30,000 BC, weren't just decoration. Some researchers believe these paintings functioned as instructional or ritual communication, basically prehistoric infographics passed down for generations. Around 100,000 years ago, we also see evidence of intentional body ornamentation, shell beads with holes deliberately drilled through them, found across Africa and the Middle East. These weren't just jewelry. Archaeologists believe they likely signaled identity, status, or group affiliation, meaning humans were broadcasting information about themselves before a single word was ever written down. Fashion as communication predates language as we understand it, which is a wild thing to sit with. There's also evidence that early humans used fire and smoke for long-distance signaling, warning nearby groups of danger, or coordinating movement across valleys. Although since smoke doesn't exactly fossilize, most of what we know here comes from educated guesswork rather than hard proof. While cave art and body language were handling the basics, a completely different kind of communication problem was about to get solved: the Bronze Age. And the solution wasn't poetry, or storytelling, or anything remotely romantic. It was accounting. Cuneiform, developed by the Sumerians around 3400 BC, is widely considered the first true writing system in human history, and the earliest cuneiform tablets we've found are literally inventory records, grain shipments, tax records, who owes who, how many goats. Humans invented writing, and the very first thing we used it for was spreadsheets. Around the same period, Egyptian hieroglyphics emerged, a system blending logographic and alphabetic elements used for everything from religious texts to royal decrees carved directly into monuments built to last forever. And they did. We're still reading them thousands of years later. Also during the Bronze Age, the Phoenicians developed what's considered the ancestor of most modern alphabets, a lean system of around 22 characters representing consonant sounds. This is a massive deal, because it meant writing no longer required years of memorizing hundreds of symbols. It started democratizing literacy, at least a little. Trade exploded during this period too, and with trade came a very practical problem. How do you negotiate with someone who doesn't speak your language at all? This is likely where early trade pigeons and hand signals for numbers and goods started forming, informal systems letting merchants communicate value without sharing a single word in common. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia even show early evidence of sealed envelopes, clay coverings wrapped around a message specifically to keep it private during transport, which means humans invented mail fraud prevention before they invented the postage stamp. Now, let's talk about an era that scaled communication up in a way nobody had really attempted before: the Iron Age. Writing was more widespread by now, and empires started building actual infrastructure specifically to move information faster than a human could walk. The Persian Royal Road, constructed around 500 BC, had relay stations where messengers on horseback could swap for fresh horses mid-route, allowing a message to travel roughly 1,600 miles in about a week. For the time period, that's absurdly fast. The Greek historian Herodotus was so impressed by this system that he wrote about couriers being stopped by neither snow, rain, heat, nor darkness, a line that, funnily enough, later got quietly borrowed as the unofficial motto of the US Postal Service more than 2,000 years later. Meanwhile, in China, we start seeing the early groundwork for what would eventually become paper, although true paper as we know it wouldn't be perfected until later. Before that, bamboo strips and silk were commonly used as writing surfaces, which honestly sounds like an absolute nightmare to lug around compared to a scroll. This era also gave us the Greeks formalizing rhetoric and oratory as an actual studied skill, treating persuasive speech as something to be trained, not just something you were naturally good or bad at. And over in India, this period saw the rise of complex oral transmission systems, entire religious and philosophical texts memorized word for word and passed down across generations with almost no written backup at all, which, when you think about it, is an insane feat of collective memory that modern humans would probably fail instantly. Then comes an era that gave us one of the most quietly important inventions in human history, and it wasn't glamorous at all, was the medieval era. Paper, properly refined and finally mass-producible, had originated in China centuries earlier but spread widely across the Islamic world before reaching Europe by the Middle Ages. Paper mills started appearing, and written communication suddenly became dramatically cheaper than parchment made from animal skin. The Islamic world during this period also established some of the first organized postal and information networks that crossed beyond a single empire's borders, using couriers, way stations, and even carrier pigeons to move messages across enormous trade routes. Carrier pigeons, by the way, remained militarily and commercially relevant all the way up through World War I, which is wild to think about. Over in Europe, monasteries became the main hubs of written knowledge, with monks spending years hand-copying manuscripts, a process so painfully slow that a single Bible could take a monk's entire working life to finish. This era also gave us heraldry, coats of arms, and banners, a visual communication system used specifically because most of the population couldn't read at all. If you couldn't read a name, you could still recognize a symbol on a shield from across a battlefield, which functioned as a genuine life-or-death form of communication. And in East Asia, this period saw the invention of woodblock printing, centuries before Europe would get its own printing breakthrough, allowing the mass reproduction of Buddhist texts and calendars well before Gutenberg was even born. And then everything changes. The early modern era. In 1440, Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press with movable type in Germany, and it's genuinely hard to overstate how much this single invention reshaped human history. Before this, books were rare, expensive, and copied by hand one at a time. After this, information could be mass-produced. Gutenberg's first major printed work was a Bible, and within decades, printing presses had spread across Europe, producing millions of books, drastically boosting literacy and directly fueling movements like the Protestant Reformation, since ideas could now spread faster than any single authority could suppress them. This era also gave us the newspaper, with some of the earliest regularly published news sheets appearing in Germany in the early 1600s. For the first time in human history, a regular person could wake up in one city and read about events happening somewhere else entirely, sometimes within the same week they occurred. Postal systems also became far more formalized, with countries establishing official services, standardized routes, and postage that regular citizens, not just merchants or nobility, could actually use. And it's worth mentioning that this same era gave rise to the coffeehouse as an information hub, especially in England, where newspapers, gossip, and business deals all circulated in the same smoky rooms, making coffeehouses functionally the social media of the 17th century, which brings us to an era where communication stops being fast and starts being instant. The modern era. In 1837, Samuel Morse develops the telegraph and Morse code, and for the first time ever, a message could cross an entire continent in seconds instead of weeks. The first transcontinental telegraph line in the US was completed in 1861, and it put the Pony Express, a horseback mail relay system that had only existed for about 18 months, completely out of business almost overnight. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patents the telephone, and suddenly humans could hear each other's actual voices across massive distances. Radio followed shortly after, with Guglielmo Marconi sending the first transatlantic radio signal in 1901, and within a few decades, broadcasts were reaching millions of homes simultaneously with news, entertainment, and, yeah, propaganda too. Television came next, bringing moving images into homes for the first time, and by the mid-1900s, an entire family could. Then the internet arrives, and from that point on, the pace of change becomes almost too fast to fully process. Email in the early 70s, originally just a convenience for researchers on connected university systems. Text messaging in the 90s, initially treated as a minor afterthought feature nobody expected people to actually use. Then social media, which didn't just speed communication up, it completely rewired what communication even means, collapsing the line between broadcaster and audience so that literally anyone with a phone can now reach more people instantly than entire newspaper networks could reach in a week just a century ago. So when you look at this whole timeline side by side, some pretty clear patterns start showing up. Sometimes a new system emerges out of pure necessity, like cuneiform being invented just to track grain shipments. Sometimes it's about outrunning distance itself, like the Persian Royal Road or the Telegraph collapsing weeks of travel into seconds. Sometimes a technology sits quietly in the background for centuries before it finally clicks somewhere else entirely, like paper existing in China long before it transformed Europe, or woodblock printing predating Gutenberg by hundreds of years. And sometimes, like with the printing press or the internet, one single invention doesn't just speed things up, it fundamentally rewrites who gets to have a voice at all. What's genuinely wild is that across tens of thousands of years, the underlying goal never changed once. Get an idea out of one skull and into another. We just kept getting terrifyingly efficient at doing it, going from cave paintings that took generations to interpret to a message that now reaches the other side of the planet in under a second. Anyway, that's how human communication actually evolved across every major era. Let me know which era you want a full deep dive on. No cap, that's the file. Catch you next time.